In this video I'm going to go through a review of the course to bring it all together, hopefully to give you an idea of what overall is involved in rural valuation. By doing this we'll see how the modules fit together, and after we do that I'm going to go briefly through the overall format of the exam to give you some guidelines for exam preparation. Let's begin by looking at Moodle. As you go through the modules in Moodle, the most interesting topics are probably what you see towards the bottom of the list, and that's where we start looking at the pastoral and dairy industries, broadacre and small crops and so on, because that's really the stuff of the rural world, the rural property. However, before we get there, you will have found that we've gone through a number of modules, a number of topics, where we dealt with far more general and background issues. It turns out that unless we have a general understanding of the overall context of rural Australia and productive land in the rural sector, it's relatively difficult to get straight into valuing a dairy farm or a sugar plantation or something. And so what we've aimed to do is first of all introduce the overall rural context, but then we've moved into some very important general issues, especially ones which have become important in recent years. Of these, probably the most important is the issue of water, so the emergence of water property rights and the management of water beyond the boundaries of individual farms and the different approaches to allocations and ownership of water property. As well as that, there's the matter of overall increase in environmental controls, and of those, for rural Australia, the most important is the control or the freedom that a landowner has over vegetation. So Module 3 looks at the management of vegetation, the significance of vegetation. Module 5 has taken us through a close inspection of the science of climate change and the whole matter of carbon property, carbon credits, and the impact that this is likely to have or could have on rural industries. And what we've seen there is the contrast between the current science of climate change, especially as it's emerged this side of about the year 2000 roughly. And what we've seen is the contrast between that and the political momentum that has now come to be behind the climate change movement. And with the political change is the whole matter of carbon credits and carbon management. Now, the carbon management issue is a very important issue for all rural Australia because it really promises to affect most rural industries, either by encouraging the locking up of rural land as carbon sinks, but also the management of those carbon sinks even when you make that decision. So there are a number of issues in Module 5 that we need to come to grips with. We then go down through the doings, the actual work of rural valuation. And so in Module 6 we really focused on the methods. Now behind all these modules of course is the textbook, so you can, well, I'm going to be assuming that you've read the chapters of the textbook. In fact, preferably by now you should have all of the textbook under your belt. Okay, Module 6 is the doings of rural valuation. To a certain extent we have gone, well, we have looked at your ability to perform rural valuations in the assignment, and so the mechanics of performing a rural valuation is largely been assessed in the assignment. However, the theory of how the various approaches to rural value are done is still an issue that you need to be aware of. So don't put aside totally the, if you like, the mechanical or technical or practical aspects of rural valuation when you review Module 6. As we move down, we then move into looking at the the actual industries, and we really devote almost half of the course to going through a selection of particular rural land uses and the peculiarities associated with their valuation. I cannot say that one of these is more important than the other. Ultimately, if you find yourself practicing in rural valuation, you may be in a sugar area or a beef area or what have you, and so what is important to you in that case will be obvious from the district you're working in. However, to have an overall feel for rural valuation, it's important that you're able to speak the language and understand the dynamics of as many aspects of rural land use as possible. And so Module 8 to 12 are extremely important. Let's move now to have a look at the exam. The exam is going to be in two parts. The first part will be a case study, and the case study will take a rural land use, such as what we find in Modules 8 to 12, and you'll be asked to at least give the general mechanics of how that valuation is going to be done, what data you might need, what processes you're going to follow, and what sort of cautions and all the rest of it. So all aspects of the doings of rural valuation, if you like, from a strategy point of view or a practical point of view, will be looked at in the case study. And you can see that that is a fairly substantial part of the paper. The second part of the paper consists of a series of short essay questions. Now, to complete the short essay question, depending on whether you're very compact and succinct and use bullet points to get your answer across and maybe some diagrams, you might be able to complete one of these in maybe less than a page. If you're a bit more wordy in your presentation, or you want to add some extra completion or whatever, you might find yourself writing 2 or 3 times that amount. And so it's hard to say precisely how much space to allocate to each of these questions. However, I do recommend that you keep an eye on your time, and so look at how much time you have for each mark and then allocate it accordingly, and be quite strict with yourself not to go over time. No point in spending twice as much time on one question if it means that you don't get to one of the other questions at all. It's very likely not to be a very successful strategy. In the short essay questions, you'll have a choice from the selection, and really those questions can be taken from any of the modules. Now, there's a strategic aspects to answering short essay questions. In a short essay question, it's not like an exam where there might be 50 or 100 small questions asking you for particular definitions or crisp one-word or 5-line answers. In a short essay, typically you're asked to comment or explain or contrast some broader area of theory or practice or what have you. And so you go in sort of with that in mind. You really need a broad brush approach. To give you an idea, in terms of answering these, typically each question will represent probably at least one module or some element from one module, and it will require a general answer. To get a pass in a short essay question, generally you should be able to get a pass. In fact, it's unlikely you wouldn't get a pass if you have read and digested the study guide or the theory notes for the module, and that gives you a general broad brush understanding of whatever the topic is. For people who want a better grade, then you'll be looking at making sure that you have read not only the study guide but also the text fairly thoroughly, and you have a more precise understanding, so you're able to put more detail. You avoid any minor kind of errors in terms of your description of whatever it is that you're answering. That's for the credit distinction area. As you move up, and if you want a distinction or high distinction, we would expect that there will be evidence of all of the resources being at your fingertips. So in other words, you have read the text, the study guide, you've done whatever exercises are recommended, and you've read the additional reading. Now, in terms of evidence, it means that it's very useful if you are able to come in and refer to authors by name and associate their particular ideas and contributions to them. And especially if you want the highest grades, high D and so on, it's useful to consider going in with a handful of quotes or even diagrams or some other way of communicating answers to the questions that show that you really are on top of the topic, whatever it is, and you're able to express yourself very, very clearly and crisply, succinctly. That gives you a choice, really. You can decide what grade you want by the amount of reading and work you want to do, and also perhaps by considering amongst yourselves the how to explain the issues that are presented to you. Okay, that takes us through the exam. Overall, I hope that as you do your exam preparation, you're able to see the course as a whole come together as communicating a particular group of ideas that are intended to take you away as confident or competent in approaching the whole question of rural valuation and being able to function as a part of a rural valuation practice. Of course, in one course it's impossible to give you all of the experience necessary to be able to practice independently in this rather specialised area, especially interesting area. However, you'll certainly be able to handle yourself quite well as a junior valuer in the rural sector and valuing rural land. I hope you've enjoyed the course. Even if you never practice in the rural environment, I expect that some of the insights and perspectives that you will have gained by going through this course will help you in other areas of practice, even if you never get out of the main street of a capital city, because rural valuation does tend to get us to think of a number of fundamental issues connected with the notion of property value that are actually applicable to any environment and situation. I hope you do well in the exam. I hope you've enjoyed the course, and I look forward to your feedback.